Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I am your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. Joining me is another author for this week's author interviews. My guest is often found in his garage gym or the mountains where he lives, where he isn't writing epic fantasy. A virtual fitness professional by trade, he integrates his creative passions into movement training with maces, clubs, staves, and swords to unlock his inner gladiator. My guest loves stories more than writing, reading, gaming, playing music, hiking, and paddleboarding. If he's not working on his story, he's helping others develop theirs as an author coach. Living in Arizona with his wife Colleen, he continues writing epic fantasy novels while exploring different storytelling mediums so he can inspire others to hope, live, and to believe. So let's give a huge round of applause to a first timer here on the channel, author Tim Facciola. I want to make sure I pronounced your last name correct.
Nailed it. And thank you so much for having me on, Gabriel.
Awesome, Tim. Awesome. So before we dive into the hard questions, is there anything else you'd like to add about your background?
So I would say my background, I'm the author of the Vengeful Realms trilogy. This is what most people are probably going to know me for. I did a rapid release of these. So I spent like 10 years writing them and then released them all over the last 6 months or so. So it's been a sweaty journey. And as of a couple weeks ago, it is now a multi-award winning book series. So that's always, yeah, thank you. I feel like I should mention that at some point.
Well, that's great. Congratulations on that. So let's actually dive right into the question. So, Tim, for you growing up, what would you say is like your aha moment when you realized that being a writer and being an author was something that you wanted to pursue?
It wasn't growing up. It wasn't something that I like always knew or always thought. It was kind of like a bucket list thing for me. Like, oh, I think it would be cool to write a book. But it was never like something that I was like, oh, I'm working towards this goal. I was in a band in college, and we were doing it. We were, had tours booked, and we were trying to a get on a label, and we had something lined up, and then the drummer left. We tried to find another drummer, and it just fell apart.
All right.
And I did a lot of the songwriting. I did like that. That was my creative outlet, and I didn't feel I had the talent to do so on my own. So I was like, what's something that I can do on my own, just for me, and that's creative. And I was between writing and drawing, and I decided I wanted to write, and that was a little over 10 years ago now.
Dang, crazy. So, what can you tell us about your book for those who have not heard of it? What is the brief synopsis about your series?
Sure. So Eventful Realm is Gladiator meets Game of Thrones in a world of warring gods. That's like the quick elevator pitch. There, when I say Gladiator, I wanted to imagine this, Roman aesthetic, that like time period, and but I wanted to showcase like, well, what would happen from a sociological standpoint if
Hmm.
that aesthetic and culture dominated into the time period of the feudal era in Europe. And like that is all over fantasy, but I was like, well, what if it had like this type of flavor to it?
Okay.
So that was like from the gladiators, the world building elements. The Game of Thrones, there are 7 main POVs, perspectives in the story that kind of intertwine and weave together. Um, More like Game of Thrones was like those A Song of Ice and Fire books were a big inspiration to me, and I loved seeing how are these seemingly disconnected things all integrated and coming together. And I loved doing that. The basic synopsis, and then I love mythology, so having this like warring god system, and made my own pantheon. So having that type of set of stakes just made all of this come together quite wonderfully for me, at least. Um, but the story mainly centralizes around Zephyrus. Zephyrus is an amnesiac who is enslaved and like
Oof.
put into gladiatorium, and he is quickly picked up by a kind of a disavowed prince because there is a plot to like a coup that's trying to depose the king. So this pseudo prince, this disavowed pseudo prince, is actually recruiting Zephyrus the gladiator to kind of spy on political rivals who he thinks might be involved in this coup. So what starts out as, Zephyrus just wanting to, yeah, I'll do this for you if you'll get me my freedom. So it's all
Mm.
about his individual freedom, but individual freedom realizing like he's an amnesiac. He's seeing this system for what it is and going like, this is awful for everyone. This is unfair.
Right.
This is unjust. So it's no longer about his individual freedoms, but the freedoms of others. And then the freedom of others becomes the freedom from these corrupt warring gods. So that's kind of like each time the umbrella gets a little bigger. So that's, I'd say, like almost the series overview.
Fascinating. The fact you combine like Roman elements, gods, and all that stuff, that instantly hooked in for me. As a classical historian, I absolutely love that. And I find that very fascinating because in fiction and fantasy itself, you really don't get a lot of like the gladiator themes or like the Roman themes. So I'm glad, Tim, that you're able to write a story, a series of books actually, where you're able to incorporate all of that. And so far, I'm glad that it has found you success, that it is an award-winning series. So again, congratulations on that. And so now let's actually peel back the layers. Let's start at the very beginning, Tim. So this is going to be a two-parter. So when you began writing, or let's say when you began crafting the idea of this series, what was the initial desire you wanted to satisfy for your readers? And later, when you were writing it, what was your promise to them?
Okay. Very good question. First, I'll answer part two. So,
Okay.
what was my promise? My promise was I am not going to do what George R. R. Martin did to me and not finish this wonderful story. So, which was a big reason why I was like, okay, I'm going to write the whole thing and then go back, edit it all together, have Easter eggs, have like all these little things that, like, as a reader, I love. I love when like the rereadability is there because, oh wow, this was really thought out from the beginning. I can do that when I have like I write book three, finish it, and go, ooh, I can put like little foreshadowing bits in book one. I enjoy that kind of stuff. So the promise to the readers is if I'm if I'm gonna write something, it is a fully fleshed out vision. I know how it's going to end, and there's a catharsis I'm trying to arrive at. I want my readers to arrive at and have that thematic resonance. So I begin with the end in mind. I would say if I have like a personal motto, it's begin with the end in mind. So the stories very much did that. As it relates to, like, I call them story seeds, like the inspirations behind the
Right.
ideas. There were three things I really wanted to include. One was Spartacus's rebellion from Rome in the Servile Wars. That was
Okay.
like the initial, like, I love this. Like, it's such a tale of, you know, the fight for justice amidst like a world, like an empire that is just indomitable,
Right.
and one person's story and how one person's mission became something so big that it's still talked about thousands of years later. Like
Hmm.
that's amazing. So I've always kind of gravitated to that. I've always kind of gravitated to rebellion stories and revolution stories in general. I've found them fascinating from a like a sociological and psychological perspective of like how bad does it need to get for individuals to say like, okay, it's worth me risking X, Y, and Z. And sociologically, how bad do things need to get before groups of people who have differences start coming together and realize, like, well, the only way we beat them is if we do this. We have to join. And those themes were really important to me. I wanted to create, um, we're a stronger together, not in spite of our differences, but actually because of our differences. And that's something that I believe I was able to do quite well with a Vengeful Realm. So those were the seeds, those were the promises, and um, so far, what readers are telling me is that it's delivering. So I'm happy to hear that.
That's good. And that actually kind of leads into the next question revolving the readership and the reviews. So when you finished writing the first book, you got it edited, you got the cover artist, you got everything you need, and you just put it out there. What was the initial feedback like from the readers? Was it positive? Was it negative? Was it mixed? And as a bonus question, is there one review that sticks out to you and has stayed with you with the rest of the series?
Um, so I think because I'd written it so many times over that 10-year period, and worked with my editor quite closely over that time period. Um, like almost like book one was very well received. I think I have one star review, which is, okay. The they happen, they're going to happen. Not every book is
Yes.
for everyone. And I didn't like, the way I look at it is, well, I didn't write it for you. I wrote it for me. And it turns
Hmm.
out all the 5-star reviews, I wrote it for them too, I guess. You know what I mean? But the I had editorial reviews done. So I had a lot of critical feedback even before the book was released. So when the reviews came in and they were positive, it was like, yeah, okay, that's that's what should be happening, right? So that was, it's really nice to see. But like, now that like book three just came out a couple weeks ago, and for me that kind of felt like, okay, now what do people think? Because that's the whole story.
Right.
So the book three reviews, which are starting to come in now, um, like that's been really rewarding. And it's when you, as a creative, right? Like your mission is to, you know, tell a story that's going to resonate with readers, and to be able to have that desired, um, the desired impact, have that be received. And the desired impact was of this trilogy was very much, um, everyone deserves a second chance. Doesn't mean that their second chance needs to be near you, but everyone has an opportunity for redemption. And I we do have the capacity to be stronger together, but we're going to have to not just overcome our differences, but actually see them as strengths, that we can learn from each other, grow with one another, um, grow from one another, even if it's no longer together. And when people were kind of having that revelation through the story, that means thematically, my characters through the plot proved the theme, and that's the mission.
Awesome. So would you say, you probably already may have answered it, would you say that your promise and your desire was validated from the reviews left by people who read the books?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's always wonderful to hear. And like, there's a couple authors that, I've sent the book to, who've read it and gotten back to me. And there's like readers and authors. Like, authors read with an author brain, so it's always interesting that, like, the different types of conversations that come from that. But yeah, I just think that anytime you create art, I hope it resonates with people. But really, at the end of the day, I wrote it for me. I couldn't be prouder of it. I hope it works for other people too. But so far, it seems that those two things align.
Awesome. That's really great to hear, Tim. Now I cannot lead into like a heavy hitter question. So, as I'm sure you know, Tim, being an author, it is fun and rewarding, but it's also a very lonely business. It's a lonely job. You're putting hours and hours into a passion project, editing, revising, sending it to people to look at, finding the right cover. And then when you finally put it out there, there's always that voice in the back of your mind saying it's not going to be good. Why are you even doing this? Imposter syndrome that I've always mentioned on the show. And so for you, Tim, as an author and as a creative person, have you ever had those moments of imposter syndrome? And if not, what has still disciplined you to continue writing because you know being a writer is something that you need to do? It's who you are.
Sure. So imposter syndrome is very real. I don't think there's anyone who doesn't deal with it in one way, shape, or form at one point in time or another. And I think the big thing is to like community is important, and writing is it has the capacity to be very lonely. So finding your people, finding a group of people that you trust, who trust you, who believe in you, believe in your, the story you're trying to tell. I think that is really huge. Like I have a great relationship with my editor. We've worked so closely together for so long. So that like I'm a perfectionist by nature. I know
Mm,
that about myself. So a lot of the imposter syndrome for me came like more in the okay, I wrote book one, can I do it again? I like
right.
where book one is. Can I do it again? I wrote book two, and like I really like how that came out, and I wanted to make sure I didn't want the sequel syndrome where book two was
Hmm.
like less than book one. I was like, no, 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 book two's got to be better than book one, and then book three I want to be better than book two. And writing endings is hard.
Yes.
And like George R. R. Martin, Patrick Rothfuss, thank you for showing us that like endings are hard. It's hard to get it right. How do you do so? How do you do it justice? How do you ensure that you don't keep it going too long that it fizzles out, or that you cut it, you try to like wrap it up too quickly and it never really reaches the climactic moment that it could, would, or should.
Hmm.
So I'd say for me, the having that process be very much behind the scenes. Once I like released it, it was more of matter of like, well, great. I'm very proud of the creative project. I don't know. The imposter syndrome for me comes on the business end. Am I doing enough? Am
Okay.
I doing the marketing? Am I doing the advertising? Is this the right way to go about it? Is that the right way to go about it? I see other people are doing it this way. Should I be doing it that way? That's where I get like totally. But the creative process is very personal to me. I have studied my craft. I believe in my skill and in the craft itself of writing. But I've put my 10,000 hours in, so to speak. But in terms of being a publisher and being this is my business. This is like that's where every day I'm like, am I doing it right?
Right.
and there's so many people in the same boat, and I would say that this part actually feels lonelier to me than the writing part, because
Mm.
I found like a group of writers, and I was like, hey, let's do this together. We all wrote our books together. But I'm of that group. I'm the first to really publish. So now I feel like I'm kind of alone again. And I'd say and so I'm trying to reach out to new people and um, broaden my circles of, how did this work for you? How did that work? But as you can imagine, there's it's only so much time in the day. And you
Definitely.
can't be an expert in everything. And as
Mm.
an independent author, you have to wear a lot of hats.
Right.
And that's where my imposter syndrome comes in the most. But I write because I love storytelling. I truly do. I can't, I like, if I sit down to watch a movie with my wife, I'm like analyzing. I can't help it. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. There's shows and movies. She's like, you're gonna hate this, but do you want to watch it with me? Because I want your feedback on it. Like, okay, like, and but I enjoy that. I enjoy that process. So, I like that like in my mind, it's two very separate things. Like I have me as the creative, and then like that's in its own box and it's packaged and it's done. And now, okay, as a business, how do we make this thing work? And I'd say it's this box over here where I generally have more of the like, oh, what am I doing? Like,
Right.
I need an adult, you know what I mean?
Awesome. And I 100% agree. I'm in the exact same boat. When I wrote my first book and then my second book, I was finished. And then came the marketing side. And I was like, I have no idea what to do. I'm still learning. And I'm working on my third book, which is finished. And I'm working with a street team, or at least I'm trying to get a street team to help out with that, with getting the word around, getting the book ready. So that way, when I do ARC applications and my pre-order links up, I'll have a better footing. And that kind of leads into now the business side of the interview, Tim. So you've already answered. So you yourself are a self-published author for your book series. However, did the idea of being traditionally published ever come into the equation, or were you set in your path that you want to be an indie author?
It was not. I originally thought I wanted to be traditionally published because that those were the books that I read. So that was the path. That was the only one that I really understood and knew. And my editor was like, "Yeah, you absolutely like this is has the market for it." So I started querying around 2020, and world was a bit of a dumpster fire for a
Yes.
couple different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But so 2020 was maybe not the best time for publishing. Maybe like there was a lot of turnover in the industry, a lot of like um, agents were quitting, a lot of editors were switching houses or moving or leaving.
Yes.
Um, and no one was able to have those in-person meetings to pitch and sell books.
Mm-hmm.
Being an agent was hard. So I had done a virtual pitch event through Writer's Digest, and that was like October of 2020. And there was a small press that was there. They liked my pitch. They told me to submit a full thing, so I submit the full thing, and then like December, I hear back from them, and they're like, "We love it. We want to publish your book." And I was like, "Wow, what does this mean?" Like I did. So I had to like having they sent me the contract. I'm sitting there with it. I'm looking at it. I'm reading it. I had my writing group that I talked to. I had my editor that I talked to. I had a couple people who my editor was able to put me in touch with some of her other clients who have worked with um, have traditional publishing experience, indie experience, small press experience. So I got to ask all the questions, and I
Right.
was very fortunate to be able to do so because I'm the kind of person like I want to make informed decisions. I'm not
Mm.
impulsive. I don't like trust my gut. My wife's like, what does your body say? My body says I'm confused. I need more answers. So like that's just how I process things. So I did a lot of data gathering, and I ultimately decided that I didn't want to give away 92 and a half, percent of my of like royalties.
Right.
You're signing away 92.5% for, like for the paperback, and it was 91.5% for the hardback, and they were going to do the audiobook, and they were going to obviously ebook and large print, like that was their thing. And they wanted at this point book one was done. They were like, you'll have 2 years to get us book two, and then another 2 years to get us book three. We'll do the whole trilogy. And I had this like panic attack, like, well, what if I sign this contract, I'm on the hook, I have to write book two in 2 years, and at this point it had already taken me 6 years to write book one.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, I still have a full-time job. In 2020 I was trying to figure out like, how do we pivot? I had like now I'm in virtual fitness. Once upon a time that was not the case. I was in person.
Right.
I had a studio with a partner, and like we're trying to navigate like, what are we doing with all of this? um so like, the concept of giving over giving over the rights, having a deadline, and what if I'm trying to write book 2 and book 1 isn't selling?
That
And
makes
that
sense.
that to me, I was just like, that's not why I got into this in the first place. Like I would be thinking about, I'd be wearing the business hat, but trying to create, and I didn't feel comfortable with that for this story. Um, so I ultimately decided, thank you, but no thank you. I'm going to write all 3 books, and then I'll figure out the publishing process. So and at that point, the way I understand why traditional publishing works the way traditional publishing works, they don't want you to do that. They want to write book 1, see if it sells. If it sells
Right.
well, they'll give you another. And I know they do sell, they will buy series, they will buy trilogies and whatnot. But it's the same kind of issue of like, here's the timeline, here's this. Um, Most people, you wouldn't invest in writing 3 books if book 1's not going to sell well.
Mm,
Just write another book 1. But this story was too important to me. It was like it was my baby. It was on my heart, and that was the story I wanted to tell. So I just wanted to do the best that I could to tell it. And I didn't think the traditional publishing process allowed me to tell the best story I knew I could. And looking back now, I know it couldn't have. It wouldn't have. It
right.
wouldn't have served me. So I'm very happy I did what I did. That's not to say that it is not right for other people. It just, this for me, for my personality, for how I want to conduct my business, for how I want to engage with my creativity, this was the only way that really made sense to me.
That's absolutely 100% true. And that kind of leads into the next question, which I'm going to combine into 3 parts. So, Tim, in your experience with writing 3 books, I imagine you had to do like a lot of research, and not only in terms of like the audience that you were writing for, but also the type of genre you wanted to be a part of. Because I think that is very important for authors who are writing for whatever genre that they want to be a part of, whether it be sci-fi, fantasy, historical fiction, whatever. So the first part is, Tim, when you began writing the first book, and then of course 2 and 3, did you have an audience in mind, either broad or specific? 2, what books would you say have really helped you craft your authorial voice as well as narrative structure, character development, and so forth? And number 3, with the success of the first 2, and of course the third book out, do you have a better understanding of your audience and readership than you did with book 1?
Okay. I'm going to combine questions 1 and 2 because they go really hand in hand for me. So the when when I was reading, I love reading while I'm drafting,
Mm-hmm.
and gathering like different, finding whose voice do I really like value, what do I value about them. So there were 3 authors who like really stick out to me as like, it's your storytelling types that I want to kind of amalgamate and make my own. And that was the world building of George R. R. Martin, the depth and breadth of a world. That was something that was super important to me, and also the third person limited point of view, and then having um, intertwining character moments. So that I'd say was George R. R. Martin. From a characterization standpoint, Joe Abercrombie, his character work in the First Law trilogy is phenomenal. That type of um, just very so visceral, and like the way in which I think this will bring me to the part 3. The way in which he views humanity is very different than the way I view humanity, but I loved
Mm,
his approach to characterization. So I tried to adopt some of that, but from a tone and mood, I really liked the more hopeful vantage point of Brandon Sanderson's writing, because
right.
it has more of a like a trust and a faith in humanity that I would say George R. R. Martin's more grim dark, Joe Abercrombie, Lord Grimdark. Like I wanted yes, the world is dark, but I always want there to be a light at the end of that tunnel.
Right.
So that, like, I think I fit somewhere between, I'm not noble bright. It's not just happy go lucky, sunshine, rainbows. It's not cozy. It's dark. It's
No.
scary. But I wanted there always to be hope for humanity and empowerment in that comes through the journey. Like there is a light through the darkness that you can follow, and we can like find it together. That kind of tonality. So um, having those three authors in mind, I kind of knew who my audience would be.
Right.
People who read those books. Epic fantasy, it has a very dedicated fan base. Like most people who read what, like they kind of, there's a couple big names and everyone knows everyone. And there's that's growing, but for the most part, like the people at the top are the people at the top. Um, and so I knew that was my audience. From book one to book three, I wouldn't say my expectations really changed because I'd written them all together. So
Right.
I really haven't had that opportunity. But I will say that, like, in January, I have um, the prequel to the trilogy. Which, do I have the spines lined up in order? No, hold on. This goes this goes here, and that goes there. But it does make a pretty picture.
Ooh, nice. Very nice.
So the prequel will like that. I had a little bit more of an idea of, okay, I kind of want to focus this a little bit this way. It's going to have a little wider audience appeal than this does. It's going to have like, because there's seven perspectives, seven point of view characters, that there's a steep audience integration. There's a
Right.
learning curve. So this other story that has three, it's more confined. It's in one landmass, so geographically it's a little easier to follow. The plot is less twisty and turny. It relies more on suspense than it does intrigue. There's a lot of political intrigue in this. This is definitely less in that. So it definitely appeals to different, but it's still the same audience. But I think it has just different flavors. Like it's still going to be epic fantasy. It's still going to have that light through the darkness. But that's the kind of like narrative voice
Hmm.
that this is mine now. Like I've found I've made it my own. And this is, and I think people are able to, so far, people have been able to be like, oh, you kind of remind me of, like, I've gotten like Brandon Sanderson and John Gwynn. And I'm like, I'll take that. I love that.
Awesome. That's actually really great to hear. And then this kind of leads into like the final question of the business side before we get to the last few questions of the interview, Tim. And it's probably the heavy hitter out of all of them. So, a little context for this. I had a guest on the show a year ago, and we were discussing her book, Season of the Dragon. And at the time, I didn't know that was her seventh book. I was under the impression that was her first book. No, it was her seventh book. And then she dropped a pearl of wisdom, which I think every new indie author should understand and really take to heart, is that there's no guarantee that your debut novel is going to be an overnight success and be the start of your legacy. Now, that's not always the case. There are authors whose first books skyrocket to international acclaim and get attracted by all the other mediums of creation of fiction. But on the offside, you have that rise and then you fall. You may rise again, and then you'll probably fall hard. And your expectations don't meet what you want. And then again, that leads into imposter syndrome. So, for you, Tim, in your own opinion, how important is it for authors to really take that into heart when they're creating their first book, when they're really writing and crafting their voice? But that shouldn't deter them from writing if writing is truly their passion.
Yeah, so as an author coach, I have a lot of these conversations with people, and I do not believe there's any one answer. So it really depends. And like my background in fitness, it goes, well, it depends. Like that's my answer for, well, it depends. There's like, what is your goal? What is your intention?
Right.
If your goal and your intention is to um, I want to make money and work full time just on my books versus like that I need money and I need it now versus like I want to I have the ability to kind of build this thing and let it go. It's a totally different conversation, and there's two totally different processes I would suggest based on that. So I think it's just a matter of coming down to each individual person, like, what is your goal? What are you writing for? What is your
Right.
why? And if your why behind writing is for the joy of writing, and maybe you have a full-time job, maybe you have a career that you enjoy that you're not like in a rush to get out of, and you write because you love the creative process, you love storytelling, you want to share that with the world. Um, like the world is your oyster. You have so
Hmm.
many options in terms of how you go about doing it. And I think as long as you can enjoy the process, then you can't lose if that's like where you're coming from. But if you're like, no, this is my career, this is my job, this is how I put food on my table, this is how I feed my family. So it's a little different. You can't treat it the
Right.
same way. You kind of have to write a little bit to market. If you have something that's not really working, or doesn't have the acclaim that you want it to, well, then you have to look like, well, maybe the audience there isn't a large enough audience that's into this kind of thing. This is a very niche thing. But if you're just writing for your passion, you can write that niche thing and you'll find your readers. It might take a little longer. You
Right.
might not earn a living on that book, but like you absolutely go and do that. So I think you have to kind of weigh these things, and that's the unfortunate side of it when we talk about the compartmentalization of like the creative box and the business box. Do we write for passion or write for market? And if you are writing to market, how much passion can you find within that? Can you find I think the novel writing process is it's a marathon. So
Hmm.
you need to have passion behind what you're doing. Otherwise, there's a lot easier ways to make money, people.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I think it's just a matter of what do you want out of this experience, um, and going forward from that vantage point. Because otherwise, like expectations are like they can be the death of you if you have super high expectations for something that like if you're hoping this is going to financially change your life, but you're also like it's your first book, you haven't like invested the time into your craft, you haven't invested in having outside influences to kind of develop that, you're going to probably have to learn through the school of hard knocks as opposed to a
Right.
more traditional form of learning, education, training, etc. So I think that process of like the roller coaster ride, everyone is entitled to like their journey, their experience, and how they want to go about it. For me, I said begin with the end in mind. That's how I want to go about it.
Right.
So that's what works best for me. But there's plenty of authors that I work with that I'm like, this is my situation. It is not yours. Do not compare to me because you will be very disappointed.
Right.
You will be disenfranchised, disheartened. You have to run your own race. Like we can help each other to do so, but we have to understand that there is no comparisons in this
Right.
as much as like you need to have comp titles and you need to have like there are no comparisons to the authorial journey.
And that's 100% correct. And you're actually the second guest that's actually said the exact same thing. It's like, what are your goals as a writer? Are you wanting to write just for the passion of writing to say, I got a few stories out there? Or are you trying to be a writer to make money off of it and to grow your business and to grow your brand? Those are two different goals with two different objectives in mind. And it's important for authors to really understand it. So thank you for bringing that up, Tim, as being the second person that brought up those key points. And we now arrive at the last final three questions. So I'm going to combine the first two together, Tim. So, with, of course, the third book coming out and with the success of the first two and everything that has happened for you, like saying again, an award-winning series, which again, congratulations on that, Tim. Who have been your biggest supporters in this journey of yours? And have you ever gotten a sense of validation from fellow authors who have read your book?
Yes, yes, and yes. It's and that is really special. When there was an author who spoke at a uh, he spoke at a conference. It's the author's name is Nathan McCarrick. He wrote Nottingham and Lionhearts. They are both Robin Hood retellings.
I have those books.
Oh, I have you read them?
Yes, they're actually right next to me. I'm not going to spoil it, listeners and viewers. You have to read those two books. They're like the best duology of historical fiction I have ever read.
A, I love hearing you say that. B, Nathan needs to hear you say that. So, back. Oh,
Oh, you're breaking in and out, Tim. Sorry.
can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, perfect.
So the author Nathan McCarrick, he spoke at a conference I had attended, and he said like if anyone has like any questions or you want to send me a query letter and I can take a look at it, or like he was very giving with his time, and like it's seemingly no one took him up on it. So I went up, I'm talking to him, and I ended up sending him my query. I ended up doing a Q&A. Once upon a time, I had a author interview, a fantasy author interview podcast, and he was our first guest. And we talked like spoilers and the behind the scenes and how much research, and like he had such a profound impact on my writing journey because he was so open and honest about just the behind the scenes stuff. This is a guy who had as a top agent, was published through Forge, which is a huge publisher in the historical
Yes.
space. And like it's a duology, but he's like, I have the third book written. The publisher doesn't want it. I'm like,
oh,
I want it. Give it to me now. Like I've to anyone who will listen, that those books are Game of Thrones but better. Like if those were on
yes.
fantasy shelves, I think it would be a phenomenon. But because it's on historical fiction, which does have a different market, I think, and it's not like it's historically inspired, but there's elements that are not historically accurate, which
Right.
he's the first to admit. He's like, I wanted to write it for a modern audience, but I still wanted to, and I think he towed that line so perfectly. But if you have people who are, looking for the facts, and it's like, well, that's not entirely true. Like, you know what I mean? Like, but from a reader's experience, those books were so wonderful to me. So I read them and told him. And when I published my first book, I said, hey, I'd love to send you a copy. You don't have to read it. I just as a token of my thank you, token of my gratitude, like, please accept. I sent it to him. A couple months later, he got back to me with an email just saying like, I read it, I loved it, and like it was, and he's like, I can totally understand why you loved my books. I feel like we have the same. That was so life-giving to me, to have that kind of experience. It's so important to have people in your corner. Like I said, I have an editor who has been with me every step of the way, even in non-editing things. Like when I had my publishing contract in hand, having the support of my wife. My wife is just like, it's more of like, I don't know this world, but like, just getting to talk to someone, getting to, and like writing takes a lot of time on my own. So like having someone that just understands and supports that is huge as well. But sharing victories with other authors is it's super special, and I think that's one thing that I wish I had started doing earlier. I felt like I didn't have a leg to stand on until I had a book out. And that's, I'd say, my not regret, but like if I could do it again, I would try to have more, because authors, like being on this side of it versus that side of it. I think when you're on that side of, like, I'm a writer, but I'm unpublished, you look at authors as like you put them on a pedestal.
Right.
And being on the other side of it, I'm like, no, it's not really there. There's not really anything to stand on up here either. And it's just a matter of, like, people love talking about their books. So if you come up to someone and say, like, hey, I love your work, they're going to love talking to you, period. You know what I mean? And then that can become a conversation and a dialogue. And so any advice out there for, writers, aspiring authors, like, if you have an author that you love, reach out to them. They might just get back to you.
Awesome. That is actually perfect, Tim. Absolutely perfect. And we're almost nearing the end of the interview. So I'm going to combine the last question and sort of like the end question. So, with everything that you've learned, Tim, about the business, about being an author, everything, what is your one word of wisdom or your inspirational quote that you want to give to the authors out there that are really starting out? And where can people find and engage with you on social media? They want to chat with you, discuss what they love about your book, and where can people find your book?
Awesome. Okay. First, the bit of advice, the words of wisdom. Grit trumps talent. I don't care how pretty your prose is. I don't care how finely crafted a single sentence is or how much time or energy you put into. I don't. Grit. Can you continually show up for yourself? Can you continually show up, put in the work? And that's what gets books done. Not perfect sentences.
Mm-hmm.
You have to continue to, even on the days when it's hard, find time, make time, engage with other writers on the journey. Show up for yourself, show up for them, have other people who show up for you, create that community that continues to inspire, because it is a marathon. You need to have a marathon mindset. It's not just like, well, let me bang this out in a couple months and then I'll be done.
Right.
That's just the next beginning. So the grit to see things through, I think that is invaluable. Talent comes. That's the beauty of this. The more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. The more you read, the more you're going to understand story. The more you understand story, the easier it is to adopt it and break. You'd have to know the rules to break the rules. You can start doing all of those things. So just keep at it. That's the one thing. In terms of, I think part two was,
Where can people find you on social media, and where can people find your books to purchase?
okay. On social media, I'm most active on TikTok. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. I'm at Tim Facciola for everything on Instagram. If you just do at Tim Facciola, you'll find my fitness account, which I am not active on at all. So it'd be at Tim Facciola _ the author. But both should come up if you just remember at Tim Facciola. And then my books are most accessible on Amazon. I am in print, ebook, Kindle Unlimited. The audio book is out through Audible. I'm currently working to get into more libraries. So looking forward to that. In terms of purchasing, if you go to your bookstore, I am available through Ingram, so you can go to a bookstore and request. I'm in their catalog. I might not be on their shelves. You can request if that is more important to you. It doesn't matter to me. If you go to my website, timfacciola.com, it is going to link to Amazon or Barnes and Noble. That's just an extra step. But if you're more than welcome to sign up for my email list if you'd like. I don't put out much stuff, but every once in a while I share some nuggets, whether they be book updates or author coaching opportunities, etc. So yeah, I think that covers it.
Awesome, Tim. Thank you so much. I will link all those down below in the description of this video. And we will conclude here for our author interview. Thank you, viewers and listeners, for joining us today. Again, a huge thank you for Tim to come to the show for the first time and to tell us all about his writing passion, his journey, and his award-winning series. Tim, thank you so much for coming on the show, and just thank you again for just being an amazing guest.
Thank you so much for having me, Gabriel. It's been a lot of fun.
And with that, listeners, I will see you again in the next episode. Make sure to like and subscribe and comment down below. And until next time, this has been The Wandering Scribe and The Wandering Quill signing out. See you next time.